Hello and welcome. Today we are gathered to hear from the legal counsel and plaintiffs of the 4 cases that arose from the police violence directed at residents and protesters in West Philadelphia in the I-676 highway during peaceful protests in 2020. We ask that you keep all questions until the conclusion of remarks. And lastly, we'd like to thank the Paul Robeson House and Museum for hosting us today. First, we will hear from the Smith Group, and that includes Charles McLaurin, Amelia Carter, Nia Holston, and Karen McClellan.
Good morning. In July of 2020, the Legal Defense Fund, along with our co-counsel, filed a lawsuit on behalf of residents in a predominantly black neighborhood in West Philadelphia. The lawsuit challenged the Philadelphia Police Department's use of excessive and unwarranted militaristic force during a peaceful protest. This was all set against the backdrop of nationwide protests against police violence and other attacks against black people. Like countless communities around the country, West Philadelphians engaged in peaceful protest, advocating for systemic reforms to change unconstitutional policing after the murder of George Floyd. The irony is that the police department responded to protests of police brutality, racial discrimination, and excessive force with further brutality, discrimination, and excessive force, terrorizing bystanders and residents with military-style weapons. There should be no place for militarizing a police department that is supposed to serve its citizens. Now, monetary compensation is an important step, but it does not represent full accountability for the harm that occurred. The city still has not given directly impacted residents from the 52nd Street corridor a simple apology, nor has it properly acknowledged the egregious acts that took place on May 31st, 2020. True healing cannot begin until the city takes full accountability. With that being said, we believe that today's settlement represents a long overdue and frank recognition of the stark violence that police inflicted on West Philadelphia residents and protesters. The settlement also recognizes the continued significance of their calls for racial justice and police accountability. We hope that today's settlement provides a measure of healing for those harmed by police violence in 2020 and beyond. Thank you. My name is Charles McLaurin, and I am a senior counsel with the Legal Defense Fund. Spelled M as in mother, C-L-A-U-R-I-N as in Nancy, McLaurin.
Hi, my name is Amelia Carter. I am a plaintiff in this case. Instead of protecting us, the Philadelphia Police Department waged war in our streets. By blanketing a community in tear gas, they haphazardly attacked law-abiding citizens. They haphazardly attacked law-abiding citizens in our homes and on our sidewalks. There is no place for the militarization of a police department that is supposed to serve us. The settlement's disengagement from the 1033 program, which arms law enforcement with military equipment, is a welcome start that prioritizes our safety. It represents a significant stride in preventing the police department from being granted the authority to act against its own citizens in the future. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nia Holston, last name spelled H-O-L-S-T-O-N, and I am a staff attorney with the Abolitionist Law Center based here in Philly. And I want to start by acknowledging the social movements in Philadelphia and the long-standing Black radical tradition that motivated us to take up this fight. Litigation is but one tool to achieve change, and we are continually inspired by the power of collective action and the strength of West Philly residents who have encountered disinvestment, state aggression, and violence, and we will continue to fight for change. As a part of this agreement, the city has affirmed that it has ended its participation in the 1033 program. This is a federal program that allowed the Department of Defense to give state, local, and federal law enforcement agencies military hardware, including combat vehicles, rifles, and other weapons that have been used to wage violence against Black communities in police raids and to engage in police violence against folks, even those who are protesting police violence. It is up to the residents to hold the city to its pledges and to honor those who have been harmed. Furthermore, the Philadelphia Police Department will now be required to report on their use of force against West Philly communities and to answer to those who they have harmed about how they will disengage from that use of force in the future. The city will be required to bring data to the community, and the community can hold them accountable for what that data shows. And while we celebrate this victory, we also recognize that the work is far from over. This settlement is only a small part of a long and difficult struggle for racial justice and an end to police violence against Black communities. And we must continue to utilize the tools that we have to fight for change, and we must continue to hold those in power accountable. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Kara McClellan. I'm the director of the Advocacy for Racial and Civil Justice Clinic. On May 31st, 2020, Philadelphia residents took to the street in protest of Mr. George Floyd's murder and the police killings of countless other Black people. Tragically, police responded to protesters with excessive force and the very brutality that had led people to protest in the first place. Over the course of the day, the Philadelphia Police Department's use of tear gas and other military-style weapons turned the residential area surrounding 52nd Street into something resembling a war zone. Often legal settlements come in the form of compensating a harmed person without accounting for the trauma and damage that police violence does to the entire community. This settlement is unique in that in addition to $9.25 million in individual damages, it includes a commitment to direct an additional $500,000 toward a grant for culturally responsive mental health and wellness services and other community-based programming. The grant will be administered by Bread and Roses Community Fund and led by a committee made up of people who are directly impacted by the events of May 31st, 2020, and West Philadelphia residents. If you would like to receive more information about the West Philadelphia Community Fund grant, you can do so at breadrosesfund.org. Our hope is that today's settlement sets an important precedent for police accountability to the community in future cases. Thank you.
Now we will have the Welch Group, Jonathan Feinberg and Ed Parker.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here. My name is Jonathan Feinberg, F-E-I-N-B-E-R-G. I am an attorney with the Philadelphia civil rights law firm of Carries, Rudofsky, Messing, Feinberg, and Lynn. I am co-counsel with the attorneys who you just heard from in the Smith versus City of Philadelphia litigation, and additionally, my firm represents 80 plaintiffs in a case called Welch versus City of Philadelphia. Every single one of those 80 plaintiffs was subjected to tear gassing and other abuse on June 1st, 2020, while engaged in peaceful political demonstration against police violence on Interstate 676. I'd like to make note of 3 points this morning. First, today is a day to honor the bravery and courage of the clients we represent. The 80 people who are plaintiffs in the Welch case only became plaintiffs because they decided to raise their voices against systemic police violence. In return, they were subjected to the very conduct against which they were demonstrating. Rather than stop their advocacy, they chose to speak out even more by bringing this lawsuit. Throughout, they have told deeply personal stories about the trauma they faced. And it is only through their willingness to do so that we are in a position today to announce this result. Second, today is a day to honor the collaboration and skill of more than 20 lawyers and law students who joined forces to bring these various cases. I've practiced as a civil rights lawyer in this city for more than 20 years, and have throughout that time marveled not only at the passion within this community to advocate for necessary systemic reform within the criminal justice system, but also at the spirit of cooperation that informs massive efforts like what occurred in these cases. Finally, today is a day to recognize that while these cases have produced an admirable result, our job is far from over. Police violence and resistance to protest has a long and sordid history in the city of Philadelphia. We are fooling ourselves if we think that one set of lawsuits will bring an end to that history. These settlements are a significant step, but there is more, much more, that needs to be done. I, for one, am comforted in knowing that the people who brought these lawsuits and the lawyers who assisted them in doing so are engaged in these ongoing efforts. Thank you once again for being here, and I would like to introduce my client, Ed Parker, who will speak on behalf of the Welch plaintiffs.
Hello, my name is Ed. I was one of those detained on 676. It seems our mistake was asking for the PPD to live up to their mission statement instead of celebrating a local sporting victory. Their mission statement suggests that they should have been fighting the fear of crime and terrorism, not providing us real-world examples in our streets and in our homes. Enforcing laws while safeguarding our constitutional rights, not simultaneously violating both. Providing quality service to residents, not lacrimation agents and kinetically energized batons. My injury endangered my career in public service, and I will bear the physical and psychological scars my entire life. Zip-tie cuffs damaged my wrist, causing me to lose strength in my hand, and I had to go into the knife 3 times to correct it, with no guarantee that the injury won't reoccur. I had the privilege of being CS gassed as part of my training for Uncle Sam, but hearing the choking, weeping, and people calling out for their loved ones was something else entirely. They made sure one of the first things they did was to rip off our masks and then subsequently stuff us on buses and in cells together. This was June of 2020, and the pandemic implications of which should not be underplayed. The absurdity of being the subject of police brutality during a protest against police brutality was not lost on us. These are just small parts of one person's story. A lot of the threads were added to the tapestry of police brutality and brought together by the weft of the PPD's actions. Another series of unfortunate events that hopefully motivates workers and historically marginalized people to engage more in the political aspect of our society and build stronger solidarity with each other. This settlement has shown me that change is possible and the system has the resources to do so. We just have to ensure they keep taking these steps while we work to transform the aspects of society that cause the conditions we protest. Peace to you if you're willing to fight for it.
Now we will have the Zolotar group, including William Hose and Aaron Ziegler.
Good morning, and thank you for coming today. I'm William Hosey, and with me is my colleague, Arthur Manahor, my client, Aaron Zager. Arthur and I are with the Cohen, Swift & Graff firm here in Philadelphia. Today we would like to give thanks to those whose efforts over the past 2.5 years resulted in the settlement with the city that we're here to talk about today. We start by recognizing the plaintiffs who were stirred to exercise their constitutional right to free speech, to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances, and who thereafter had the gumption to take legal action when their exercise of these rights was violently and unlawfully abridged. Thanks also to Judge Strawbridge and his clerk Aaron Hills and his staff for skillfully and patiently mediating the claims of hundreds of plaintiffs and guiding the parties to settlement. Thank you also to the city's attorneys who professionally negotiated a fair and reasonable resolution of the plaintiffs' cases. Last but not least, I want to thank the other plaintiffs' counsel. I apologize in advance if I leave anyone out. Jonathan Feinberg and Susan Lynn of Carey's, Radowski, Messing, Feinberg, and Lynn, Kara McClellan and Rachel Kleinman of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Kevin Mincy and Riley Ross of Mincy Fitzpatrick Ross, LLC, Paul Hetznicker of Paul Hetznicker Esquire, Marnie Jo Snyder of the law offices of M.J. Snyder LLC, Michael Corad of Michael Corad Esquire, and Brett Grote of the Abolitionist Law Center. These accomplished attorneys who had filed separate lawsuits on behalf of people harmed by the actions of the police on May 31 and June 1, 2020, welcomed my firm into the fold, and thereafter plaintiffs' counsel worked together as a team. Together we advanced the interests of every plaintiff and achieved an excellent result for our clients. And we believe for those who in the future seek to peacefully exercise their constitutional rights in this great city. It's my pleasure to introduce Aaron Zager, our client and one of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit, who also had the courage to come forward and file a case and whose contributions to the mediation helped bring about the settlement. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Erin Zegar. My fiance and I were protesting on June 1st. I think about June 1st daily. It was chaos and pain like I personally have never experienced. And then after being tear gassed, pepper sprayed, shot at with rubber bullets, it was an incredible slap to the face to watch the city deny accountability over and over and over again. And today I thank the city for admitting wrongdoing through the settlement, but I hope that future administrations are more willing to discuss the reforms necessary to ensure Philadelphia's citizens' rights are protected and that any abusers of power are held accountable. Thank you.
And lastly, we will have the Huff group, which includes Paul Hetznicker, Kevin Mincy, Riley Ross, Marnie Jo Snyder, Anya Fox, Michael Coard, and Gwen Snyder.
Good morning. My name is Paul Hetznicker, and I have been a practicing criminal defense and civil rights lawyer in the city of Philadelphia for the last 35 years. I'm proud to stand here and representing the largest group of plaintiffs, 240 plaintiffs, representing clients both from West Philadelphia as well as on I-676 in the Parkway, harmed by the brutal violence and paramilitary attack conducted by the Philadelphia Police Department on May 31st and June 1st, 2020. I want to start out by saying the murder of George Floyd ignited or reignited an examination of the racist institutional police culture throughout this country and this city. There's a long-standing brutal history of police abuse in this city. It represents, unfortunately, a legacy of violence that has affected black and brown communities all too often and all more frequently than other communities. Following the protests on June 1st and the attack on May 31st, I reached out to colleagues and friends, Michael Cord and Marnie Snyder, both of whom assisted me, and we worked together during the Occupy Philly representation over a decade ago. I reached out to Kevin Mincy and Riley Ross, both experienced criminal defense and civil rights lawyers, and we together as a group represent the 240 plaintiffs who were harmed by the brutal paramilitary attacks that occurred on those 2 days. For the first time in 40 years, as I recollect as an activist, a young activist, as a teenager in Philadelphia, as a legal observer during my experience as a law student, and then again as representing protesters throughout the course of my career, I looked at the attacks that occurred, and it is reminiscent of what occurred 40 years ago. Because for the first time in 40 years, the Philadelphia Police Department used tear gas on peaceful protesters. This power must not go unchecked. It must be confronted. And our answer to that unchecked power were the lawsuits and the settlement that we announced here today. This is the largest settlement in a mass protest case in the history of Philadelphia. And I'm proud to say that we worked well with all of the other legal teams to come about, to get this settlement to come about. I also want to talk a little bit about the history of the brutality in Philadelphia. This goes way back. So as documented by journalists, human rights activists, by government officials, the history of brutality and the culture of brutality in the Philadelphia Police Department is longstanding and well understood. What we need is democratic accountability. This lawsuit is the first step towards that accountability. The decision by all of our clients to express their First Amendment rights on the streets of Philadelphia, or for the residents who were harmed here in West Philadelphia, to bring this lawsuit is a courageous decision. It's a decision that they collectively decided not only to compensate for the harms that they suffered, but also to take that first step towards accountability and transparency. Police departments in this country must be tethered to the democratic process. That requires a changing of the police culture. The discontinuation of the 1033 program is just one step in this effort to shift the warrior police model away from the police culture that's entrenched into a new and enlightened engagement with the public. That starts with legislative measures. It starts with the Citizens Police Oversight Commission established by the City of Philadelphia City Council so that they can conduct real oversight with subpoena power, with the ability to investigate not only broad swaths of misconduct, but individual cases as well. Our goal is to assist in that process because real reform can only come about, as I said, with democratic control. So as we think about the brutality and the history of this city that the police force has levied against the general public and protesters in particular, we have to think forward and push back against the unending power that the police department has exhibited in this city. So I want to talk a little bit about the Huff team, and then I'm going to turn it over to the rest of my teammates. Shortly after the events that occurred on May 31st and June 1st, I reached out to my colleagues here with the great experience that they have, and we combined forces and we put together this lawsuit. As I said, this lawsuit combines not only residents of West Philadelphia, but the protesters on 676. The efforts that we need to make in changing the culture within the police department begin with some of the statements and some of the suggestions that my colleagues will offer in the next few minutes. So with that, I turn it over to Kevin Mincy. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin Mincy. I'm a partner at Mincy Fitzpatrick Ross, a civil rights law firm in Philadelphia, and it's an honor to be here today. Really an honor to have worked with so many great lawyers on this litigation, and a privilege to be a part of impact litigation like this. I'd be remiss if I didn't take the time to thank, not just the folks who were plaintiffs in our cases, but really all of the people who stood up in the late spring of 2020 to speak out against the unlawful killing of black people by police officers all around the country. It was their courage that really inspired us to become a part of this case. When you see so many people who are willing to stand up and have their voice heard for people who look like me and Riley, so that people who look like me and Riley can live without fear, hopefully one day, of being killed by the police, it's a really inspiring thing, and really we felt it was our duty to get involved in this case. And so we're really, really honored to be here. It's easy to look at the final dollar amount and say, okay, this is resolution for the case is over. But for three of the Huff plaintiffs, the fight for justice continues. Many of you will remember that there were three individuals seated on the highway who were sprayed in the face with tear gas by former officer Richard Nicoletti. That criminal case is still ongoing. Our clients have been and will continue to be ready to testify when called upon. We look forward to walking with them as they seek full justice in this matter. I would say that throughout the course of our investigation in litigating this case, we uncovered hundreds of videos from the 676 area during the protests. Many of the videos showed clearly officers taking aim at Mr. Huff, shooting at Mr. Huff directly, and we know that Mr. Huff was shot in the back multiple times by rubber bullets as he fled the highway. We have turned that video over to the District Attorney's Office. We renew our call today for the District Attorney's Office to find and identify those police officers who we can clearly see in those videos and bring them to the same type of justice they seek for former officer Nicoletti. And with that, I'll turn it over to my partner, Riley Ross.
Good morning, everyone. Riley Ross, with a partner with Mincy Fitzpatrick Ross, and just like my colleagues, I want to thank our clients for giving me the privilege to represent them. I also want to thank my colleagues not only on the Huff team, but also across the 4 lawsuits for their tremendous work in making this lawsuit come about. I believe that everything happens for a reason and in the time that it's supposed to happen, and it's very fitting that this lawsuit comes at a time when our city leaders and our would-be or want-to-be city leaders are actually calling for more police, calling for larger police budgets, and even calling for a return for stop and frisk. Well, I want to stand up here and ask that those running for mayor and those running for city council denounce the calls for a return to stop and frisk. And if they don't denounce those returns, then they explain to us, to the people of Philadelphia, what has changed within the police department to justify giving police more power over us. They have to remember that people of color are going to be those most affected by a return to stop and frisk. If we don't learn from our past, then we're going to be doomed to repeat it. And if we're doomed to repeat it, if we go back to stop and frisk, we might as well now start asking who's going to be the next George Floyd? Who's going to be the next Breonna Taylor? Who's going to be the next Walter Wallace? Who's going to be the next Rekia Young? So we'd ask that our leaders and our would-be leaders, our want-to-be leaders, denounce the call for stop and frisk. And with that, I will turn it over to Marnie Jo Snyder.
I'm Marnie Snyder, and I'm a proud ally of everyone everywhere who is seeking social justice. And it's a deep allyship and a solidarity that were and are still powerful and present among our clients and among the legal teams. It's an allyship for racial justice and social change and law enforcement culture change that led many of our clients onto the streets on May 31st and June 1st of 2020 after the recent murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Elijah McClain. Empathy, solidarity, and justifiable anger led them to 52nd Street Corridor and 676 to speak truth to power. The Philadelphia police, acting with the same impunity as police forces across the country when they kill black people, we know it as qualified immunity, attacked them in a military-style assault. Our clients, an overwhelming amount of people protesting police brutality, became victims of the same. Our clients wanted then and still want change. They will thankfully be compensated appropriately for the injuries inflicted upon them, but overwhelmingly, they expressed that they would still prefer far-reaching reform. Still, and as sincerely, they would have chosen not to have burning eyes, vomiting tear gas, and wonder if they have trouble getting pregnant because the police force in their city bombed them with tear gas. This settlement is just the beginning, though. Our legal team and clients call on the police department to ban using these weapons against protesters, change their use of force protocols to weave in a preference for de-escalation before any force, and do so throughout their protocols and in their training. We call on them to add and then to emphasize the concept of do no harm in addition to just valuing human life, and then to practice that de-escalation and make meaningful change. We demand the use of evidence-based practices for de-escalation and then audits and data collection to show the public that they have made meaningful progress with their reforms. We call on the soon-to-be elected officials, whether it be in a budget or a process in other ways, to encourage these reforms. And finally, we encourage the police to cooperate with the city government to support and fund the new Citizens Police Oversight Commission and to ultimately do the right thing. I'd like to turn it over to Anya Fox, who is one of our clients and an activist and a friend, to speak to you all.
Hey everyone. We're here because the United States as a nation has a policing problem. We are here because Philadelphia as a city has a police brutality problem. American police kill and injure civilians at a rate higher than any other comparable nation in the world. Democracy in the world, I should emphasize. Yet there are no federal databases that exist, no federal research that exists to provide statistics on the death or injury of civilians by police. Independent research, though, shows us that police violence occurs when responding mostly to non-violent offences or where no crimes were actually committed. In the summer of 2020, multiple police agencies attacked civilians when we were engaged in our First Amendment protected right to assembly. This is a cornerstone of democracy, It's what creates this illusion of so-called American freedoms. Officials lied and attempted to criminalize peaceful protesters, stating immediately after we were attacked that we threw stones and rocks at law enforcement. We see this victim blaming in many, many instances of police brutality, and most often when groups lawfully assemble or seek redress to petition the government, all protected First Amendment rights. These freedoms ring hollow if they are not protected. Unless imminent danger is evident, the First Amendment right to seek redress in assembly has to be protected and facilitated by government. The 1925 Geneva Protocol categorises tear gas as a chemical weapon and banned its use after World War I. But Philadelphia intentionally targeted its own lawful citizens with a weapon that targets your lungs, your ability to see and breathe during a respiratory global pandemic. This aggressive policing model and this police misconduct costs Philadelphia citizens millions every single year. From 2016, over $297 million has been put out just on police misconduct. 40% of Philadelphia city litigation is just concentrated on PPD settlements. And that is not taken from their $788 million budget. That's taken from a different discretionary fund. The $788 million budget that has no community input, no community oversight on how it's spent. The City of Philadelphia refused any meaningful reforms that were put forward by our legal team. Therefore, we demand that all those running for mayor and all those running for city council back our call for legislation outlawing the use of chemical weapons on citizens of Philadelphia not engaged in inflicting bodily harm. This settlement is not an end point. It is merely a stepping stone from which we will continue to demand justice, demand accountability, and most importantly, demand community oversight of aggressive policing in the City of Philadelphia. Thank you.
Those of you who know me as the angriest black man in America. And I use that title because James Baldwin said to be black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. And when you realize what the Philadelphia Police Department did to peaceful protesters, what the Philadelphia Police Department did to homeowners who had nothing to do with the protest was absolutely outrageous. And nobody should tolerate it. It's a good thing when attorneys can get up here and talk about all the money we're able to provide, but that doesn't really mean anything in the long term. And what I mean by that is real substantive reform is essential, as you just heard. Before I get into my 2 minutes, I just want to thank those connected with the Paul Robeson House and Museum for providing us with this venue. It's important in a practical sense and certainly in a cultural sense. I want to make it clear that we're not satisfied. We appreciate the fact that people apparently have been compensated to a large extent financially for their pain and suffering, but much more needs to be done. And when I say much more, I do mean that. The other thing I want to say very quickly before I offer 4 suggestions, 4 solutions, is that we have to give a big shout out to the protesters. All these lawyers here, the Huff team and the other great attorneys, all great litigators, but we wouldn't even be here today if the protesters, young and old, didn't put their bodies and literally their lives on the line. So big shout out to the protesters. Having said that, there are 4, more than 4, but 4 key resolutions that are required so that we don't have to be here anymore, so that we don't have to protest anymore, so we don't have to hold these press conferences and litigate. Number 1, there's an urgent need for the City of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Police Department in both policy and in practice to not merely tolerate the First Amendment, but to embrace the sanctity of the First Amendment. In fact, there should be cops and city officials out on the street talking about First Amendment as opposed to citizens. So number one, the sanctity of the First Amendment. Number two, we urge that the mayor of Philadelphia currently and the next mayor, along with city council, do something that goes beyond their roles as municipal leaders. We're requesting and demanding that there be an urgent official lobbying by the mayor's office and city council in Harrisburg to seek the abolition of Arbitration Act 111 of 1968. And I don't have much time to talk about that, but just Google Arbitration Act Arbitration Act 111 of 1968. It literally gives the Philadelphia Police Department a license to kill. And that's not hyperbole. So we demand that the city officials petition those in Harrisburg, because Philadelphia is the most populous and most influential county among the 67. So they need to send lobbyists 24/7 to make sure that Arbitration Act 111 of 1968 is abolished. Because again, it literally gives the police a license to kill. Number three, we advocate the concept of defunding the police. Now, we don't want people to panic and get into a fit about, hey, there's not going to be any cops on the street and murderers and robbers and rapists will run wild. That's not what we mean, or any intelligent person means, by defunding the police. We think a better term is defanging the police. And by defanging the police, we mean to get away from what my colleague Riley Ross always talks about in connection with the warrior policing model. Police should be designed to always de-escalate a situation as opposed to escalating a situation. So the whole notion of defanging or defunding the police simply means to stop the aggressive escalation of police violence. That money that goes to the police could be better spent for mental health programs, for drug rehabilitation programs, for job training. So when we talk about defunding the police, we always put an asterisk there to say that what we mean is defanging the police. That's number three. And finally, number four, and you've heard, I think, a couple speakers talk about it. We understand that the city, through the mayor and council, have no real authority regarding the issue of qualified immunity, but we hope that the public find out more about qualified immunity and abolish that, just like the abolition of Arbitration Act 111 of 1968 is called for. Again, in my final 10 seconds, I want to thank the protesters for getting us here and for sparking the fire that needs to take place. And I'll end my presentation by quoting the great Frederick Douglass, who said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." And that's why I love the protesters. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gwen Snyder. I'm a survivor of the police assaults at both 676 and the 52nd Street corridor. This settlement is a win. It means we were able to hold city government and the police accountable for their violent attacks on protesters exercising our First Amendment rights and their attacks on Black communities. We organized, we fought, and we forced them to confront their wrongdoing. At the same time, this settlement by itself fixes nothing. Every morning when I'm out pushing my child in her stroller, I feel my forearm go numb. It's nerve damage from the zip ties they put us in for hours. There's no forgetting. My husband has scars from where the so-called rubber bullets hit him as he tried to help people comply with police orders and escape clouds of tear gas. There is no forgetting. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I can't help but remember bleeding through my blankets and into the mattress after the gassing. Tear gas is an abortifacient, and we were trying for a baby then. Was that a child that could have been? There's no forgetting. We were out there to protest deadly police brutality, and police brutality is what we received. Not just us, but the Black community of West Philadelphia. Their children were gassed in their own homes. Their elder family members were shot in their own neighborhoods by police eager to shut down critical speech with brutal force. As an elected West Philadelphia committee person, I am still outraged. As a mother, I am still outraged. As a human, I am still outraged. This settlement is a win, but we cannot afford to let it be our last or our only win. For the sake of this city's future, we call on this year's mayoral and council candidates to pledge support for passing and implementing a full ban on police staging and use of so-called less lethal ordnance like rubber bullets, chemical weapons, and sonic cannons against residents engaged in activities that are not inflicting bodily harm on others. Without such a ban, police will find excuses to gear up and go to war against nonviolent protesters. Again. They will lie and invent reasons to gas and shoot and scar us and our neighbors in vulnerable communities. Again. We will not let this happen. We will organize, we will fight, and we will win. Again. Thank you.
Thank you all. That is the conclusion of our remarks. I will ask for the representatives of each case to come out. And we will now begin questions.
Two things. One, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
One sort of specific to the settlement, and then one that may be appropriate for one of the plaintiffs. Regarding the settlement, there were a couple references to a program that the city's no longer going to be a part of that gave them access to certain things. Is it just that they can't be part of that program, or are there any restrictions on them obtaining those types of weapons or tools in any other way? And just say who you are when you come up. Sure.
Hi, my name is Kara McClellan. So as part of the agreement, the city is no longer engaged in the 1033 program. That's the federal program through which police departments receive military-style weapons and equipment from the federal government. It says that they have returned that equipment. So the program, their relationship with the program has ended, and they have returned the equipment that they previously received through it.
But there's, but in terms of having tear gas, for example, they can still have that.
So the agreement is only with respect to the 1033 agreement, the 1033 program and that contract. It does not expand to equipment they could receive through other programs, which is certainly important, and there's more work that needs to be done then to make sure that the police department does not have access to military-style weapons in general.
Thank you. And then the other thing that may be appropriate for one of the plaintiffs to answer is what you have seen since then from the police and the administration. You now have this settlement, but there has been some time for the police and the administration to sort of show you how they're going to handle things. What have you seen from them in the past 2 years, and how do you feel about what you have seen from the police and the city?
We haven't seen anything. Our sense, and I think the sense of many of the folks in our case, is that the city hoped they could settle and that this would go away and they wouldn't really have to take major or concrete change. And that's part of why it's so important for us to say we are not ending with the settlement, that this is an ongoing fight and this win is just the beginning. It's not the end.
I can respond to that?
Yes.
Again, my name is Kevin Mincy. I think what we've seen is, 3 months after the protests on 676 in West Philadelphia, we had the killing of Walter Wallace, and you saw how the police responded in West Philadelphia that night, advancing on individuals in the street, in line, more military-style vehicles and weapons present in West Philadelphia. So even when they knew the entire world was watching, they reverted to what's in their DNA. And so it's got to be more than words and more than paper signed as a result of a lawsuit, or there will be more lawsuits and more settlements, and the money that is spent on these settlements will continue to go up because they have to show a dedicated commitment to making the changes required.
What form will your continued efforts take? Will that be political, legal, a group form to lobby the city? What form will it be?
That's a great question. Yes, exactly. We really shift to the political arena, that these efforts to change the culture within the police department are going to have to be political efforts. And I think that's why all of us have implored the candidates to be very serious about their sense about the culture within the police department and what needs to be changed long term. We've had systemic racism within the department. We have systemic and a long legacy of brutality in the department. That's not going to change with a lawsuit. That's not going to change with a ban simply by city council on tear gas and rubber bullets. It's going to take the will of the people, which has been expressed, and it's going to take a commitment on the part of everyone that has access to the levers of power to change the way in which we police in this city and in this country. So that's a long-term political project.
What are some of the things that the city would not give that you wanted, aside from
We didn't, well, that's a great question. We didn't ask for injunctive relief. So what we're really asking for is for the political arena to take over the efforts that we have long lauded and our clients have lauded and requested on that day. It's really within the political arena and not within the context of a lawsuit.
And on the 1033 program, I think the settlement said that the city stopped doing that and stopped being a part of that in 2021. Have they agreed to never rejoin, or are they just?
I'll defer to Kara on that part of that.
So we can't, I think we can't speak to what the city's, what the future holds. I think the agreement in writing is a commitment from the city to end receiving equipment through the program and to return the equipment. And I think the pressure needs to continue to make sure that there is never a re-engagement with that or other programs to receive military-style weapons.
How many clients are set to receive part of the settlement, and do you know how much per demonstrator?
It's approximately 350 clients collectively that we represent, and the damages vary depending on the facts of what happened to different protesters and residents who are represented.
What's the most that one person gets?
As Kara said, it's all measured on the harm of each individual, so we're not going to disclose that at this point. Each individual had their own particular suffering and damage done to them, and that's something that we're going to keep with our clients at this point.
Is this solely from the 676 incident, or does this involve any other?
No, it's both the attack on May 31st of residents within about an 8 square block area that included protesters, residents sitting on their porches, inside their homes, walking on the street. It's that brutal attack on May 31st, as well as the people that were attacked on 676 and the Parkway as well. So people suffered tear gas inhalation on the Parkway while peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights.
The program that was mentioned at the beginning, I think for the community, for the West Philadelphia community, can you describe that, how that's going to?
Sure, I'll have Kara.
Sure. So as part of the agreement, there is $500,000 that is going to be designated to a community fund. The community fund will be administered by Bread and Roses. It will be through a community-led process where folks who were impacted or who live in West Philadelphia can apply to be part of the committee to administer the grant, and it will go directly to community-based programming within West Philadelphia. So it will both be for mental health and wellness services, but also more generally for community-based programming.
And I think you also mentioned that there's, like the police might have to give data to residents or something like that?
Yes, so there is also a commitment within the agreement that twice per year, a deputy commissioner from the police department will host meetings within West Philadelphia, report on use of force data, and members of the community, it's open and public for folks to attend and to ask questions. That was really important, to have the right to ask questions and provide feedback and receive responses about the data as well.
Where do you put this agreement in the context of the fact that more police killings of civilians nationally have taken terrorist charges, where do you put this context, disagreement in the context of all that?
The issue of police killing of people of color is a pressing issue that continues today. Of course, it extends to all people, but in particular, men of color are disproportionately impacted. It is the case that police use of force is the 6th leading cause of death for men of color, and it extends more broadly, but that's important to emphasize. So the work continues. I think in addition, we want to emphasize that the disproportionate criminalization of black and brown protesters continues to be a pressing issue in this country, that there's more work that needs to be done to address that, because the criminalization of protest is frankly anti-democratic and anti-American.
Let me add something to that. Again, Riley Ross, because this is an important issue, and this is at a time, that is one of the reasons this settlement is so timely, because we have our city leaders, and as I said, our want-to-be city leaders, calling for more police, calling for larger police budgets. We have to learn from the past. We are heading down a road where we're going to repeat what has happened in the 80s and 90s. This call for law and order, this call for more police as a solution to what's happening, we know that it doesn't work. We have ongoing litigation now still, the Bailey litigation, that is showing things like stop and frisk does not work, does not deter crime. It only infringes on weakening and deteriorating the relationship between the police and the community. It involves constitutional violations against mainly black and brown people. We cannot return to that. So it is important to look at what's going on at this time and this litigation as a reminder of what's happened in the past and our need to change that. Paul may have something to add to that.
No, I appreciate Riley's comments. The only thing I wanted to comment about was the domestic terrorism charges. I think what we have to look at is the broader context in which police have generated this warrior police model based on the war on crime started in the 70s, based on the war on drugs started in the 80s. Now it's a war on dissent, essentially. So it's a very dangerous development when you're using advanced surveillance techniques, allegedly to stop crime or to advance policing, but you're doing it in the context of a warrior police model. So using facial recognition software, which is racially biased, and we know what the studies say about that. Using predictive policing, which is, again, an examination of individuals' behavioral characteristics. It's a very dangerous development because it's essentially criminalizing behavior and actually seeking out suspects before they even become suspects. And that's a dangerous development in policing. That's for a broader conversation. But I think the domestic terrorism charges is an extension of this attitude that somehow if you express your First Amendment rights, I'm not talking about people committing crime. They could be charged by state and local authorities with those crimes that are relevant. But to label a domestic terrorism charge in the context of a protest, an ongoing political protest, is a very dangerous threat to our democracy.
If I can add one point, Jonathan Feinberg, putting this settlement into context, this case was not just about money, but let's consider the amount of money. $9.75 million total. That is one of the single largest settlements ever in the city of Philadelphia, and it is the largest involving a case of mass protest. I think I speak for all of the lawyers here in saying that we would prefer not to be here talking about this case. But when events like this occur, we will be here. We will be prepared to hold policymakers and officers accountable, and there will be a significant cost. And it is our sincere hope that knowledge of that cost, knowledge of the need for accountability, will lead to the significant changes that we all know are needed.
Do we have any additional questions? All right, well, thank you all for attending. If you do have any additional questions or would like to interview anyone that spoke today, please find myself or my colleagues Kayla and Henry. Please raise your hands in the back, and we will make sure that you are